The Ten Thunders crime syndicate has been operating from the shadows in the Far East for generations. Unbeknownst to the rest of the world, they had access to a secret breach that led from China to the town of Promise in the far north of Malifaux. When the breach reopened, the guild put out a call for workers, and the Ten Thunders began sending their agents to Santa Fe, but they also sent more through the secret breach. Misaki Katanaka, daughter of the Oyabun of the Ten Thunders, came as a vanguard for the organization to begin preparations for the Thunders to establish a foothold. She came with the Last Blossom, a group of powerful assassins and infiltrators who served as her bodyguard and spies. The Asian population of Malifaux City felt isolated from the rest, and so Misaki worked to consolidate them into a neighborhood that would grow into the Little Kingdom. They began policing themselves, which allowed the guild to leave them alone, and the Ten Thunders were able to operate freely. They began setting up bars, gambling halls, and brothels, and eventually they gained enough power and money that they were able to challenge all of the rival criminal organizations. Misaki worked to incorporate the other organizations into her own, and any who stood defiant were eliminated. Since coming through the breach, Misaki's noticed that her martial arts skills have increased fivefold. She hasn't heard from any of the Ten Thunders Earthside, and she started to think that this might be her opportunity to make a name for herself and strike out on her own. What's up, everybody? It has been a long time since I've done one of these videos. But now that Ashes Malifaux is out, we are getting back into it. And in case you're not familiar with this series, what I'm going to do is go through one character's entire backstory and touch on every single story that they ever show up in. I'll give you a little bit of a summary of everything that happens in those stories so that you can get the full picture of one particular character's entire story arc. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Misaki, and I've already done an episode on her, but we're going to give it a little bit of an update here because a whole bunch of things have been added to her story, and there was also a little bit that I missed when I covered her the first time. I'll be redoing a handful of Masters videos like this, but I'm also going to start covering a couple of characters that I never covered before, and we're going to mix in some non-Masters where it's appropriate as well. So get down in the comments below and let me know what character you'd like to see me do a video like this on. But now let's get right into Misaki. Misaki climbs across the roofs in the Little Kingdom while thinking about her mission here. Her brothers had recently arrived in Malifaux and had begun disrupting some of her carefully laid plans. She considers the choice before her. She can stay and perform her duties as a lieutenant in the Ten Thunders, as well as the daughter of the Oyabun, or she can abandon her duties and go it alone. Several of Misaki's brothers gather around a table as they celebrate a great victory. A servant offers them drinks, as many of them badmouth their sister Misaki for not being present. Soon the servant girl takes her place at the head of the table, revealing herself to have been Misaki all along. She berates her brothers for not following her plan, telling them that they failed to fully defeat the Dervish Swords, a rival gang, and that all their operation did was alert the gang to their plans. She tells them that they're going back to finish the job, and then thrusts her bicento at the table. It doesn't make contact, but the table shatters into pieces. Ramos watches as Karis relights a forge using her magical abilities. He approaches the woman and tells her that he has an ally who needs their help, and that he's sending her, along with a gunsmith named Victor 47. Misaki's brothers bomb the front entrance to a tea house that serves as a front for the Dervish Swords. They attack as Misaki infiltrates the building through the rooftops and watches the battle raging below her. She knows that a darkness has infiltrated Malifaux, and she suspects that it's gotten to the Dervish Swords as well. She sees a strange-looking man and woman, and then spies the Oyabun of the Dervish Swords. The man is inside what looks like a glass case, and on each side is a servant whose heart has been torn out and attached to the glass. The Oyabun speaks through them and announces to the attacking Thunders that if they surrender, they'll be killed mercifully, and one will be spared to tell the tale. Misaki jumps down out of the rafters and cuts down one of their lieutenants, and then fights her way towards the Oyabun. She attacks the glass case but finds that she can't scratch it, so she turns her blade on one of the servants. When she cuts him down, the glass cracks, but then the Oyabun reaches up and holds his hand over the heart, and the glass reforms as the servant heals and stands back up. Misaki starts quickly cutting down all of the servants, watching the glass crack and then reform, as she fights off other members of the gang. She then throws her bicento at the Oyabun, timing it perfectly as she crushes the skull of one of the servants, and as the cracks form, her bicento flies through the glass and strikes the Oyabun in the head. She knocks down the glass case, and then declares that the Thunders have won, before flames shoot out in her direction. She sees a woman with metal wings, and motions for her brothers not to interfere, so the two can do battle. Misaki tells the woman that she's too late to save her boss, and Karis replies that the man was just a pawn, and that she's there for Misaki. Misaki sees a glint of light, and notices that Karis is trying to lure her out into the open, where she can fall prey to the man with the gun. The witch shoots fire at her, and she redirects it at the man, and then orders her brothers to go after him while she deals with Karis. She charges at the woman, slashing at her carefully, and manages to damage one of her hands. Before the woman can retaliate, Misaki throws a smoke bomb and gets herself to cover as Karis unleashes another round of fire attacks. The witch starts to question Misaki's loyalty to the Ten Thunders, and Misaki counters by calling her a mercenary and telling her that she knows nothing of loyalty. Misaki insists that her membership in the Ten Thunders has taught her discipline and control, and Karis counters that control is just an illusion, that she used to try to control her power, but now she embraces the chaos. Karis unleashes a series of chaotic attacks, and Misaki defends frantically, but finds that the unpredictability of the assault makes it very difficult as she falls back. By now, the building has caught on fire and has begun to crumble, and she hears a crashing noise as the guild have been alerted and a peacekeeper is approaching. Karis indicates that it's time for her to leave, but she sends one more attack at Misaki, who decides that it's her turn to embrace the chaos. She moves unpredictably and advances on the witch, jumping through small gaps in the flame and closing the distance. As the peacekeeper attacks, Karis starts to fly away, bringing Misaki with her, but one of Misaki's loyal brothers grabs onto her, and the weight is too much for Karis to bear. She has to let go of them to escape, and Misaki and her men flee into the water as the guild overtake the area. Once they make it to safety, Misaki considers that her attack that combined careful control as well as chaos shouldn't have worked, but that it seemed to be effective nonetheless. Similarly, she has a choice to make between leading the Ten Thunders and doing her own thing, but that there was a third choice. She could lead the Thunders but do it her own way, and not just follow in her father's footsteps. Misaki and several Ten Thunders agents storm a guild warehouse where Lucius keeps magical artifacts. They dispatch the guards, only losing one man in the process, and then search the crates until they find a tome that they were looking for. A peacekeeper soon approaches and they make their escape. Misaki presents the tome to her father, who expresses his disappointment at her having lost one of his operatives. He scolds her and then leaves and slams the door. Days later, Misaki is brooding on a rooftop and almost doesn't hear as the footsteps approach. She turns to see two guild guards and a witchling stalker and handler, who threatens Misaki and says that she came for the book. Misaki quickly dispatches the two guards, and then the handler orders the stalker to attack. Misaki sends it flying off the rooftop, and the handler turns and runs as Misaki gives chase. Later, she presents the heads of the attackers to her father, and asks if she can be forgiven for her previous failure, before leaving and slamming the door herself. Chiaki dons a disguise and assists Arthur von Stoker in investigating a series of murders. Their investigation leads them to the Library of All Things, a magical place that serves as a repository for the culture and legends of all of the beings in Malifaux. It also works the other way, using these stories to influence the culture and the people. When Chiaki and Van Stoker finally make it to the Library of All Things, they see a group of masked individuals, and then Chiaki levels a gun at Van Stoker's head. She marches him out in front of the others, and they take off their masks, revealing themselves to be Lucas McCabe, Jacob Lynch, Mei Fang, Yan Lo, and Misaki. Chiaki tells the man that they needed him to return here on his own volition, and Van Stoker insists that he's never been here before. Misaki explains to him that the Library of All Things has already begun incorporating stories from the humans, but none of the stories are yet from the Three Kingdoms. She explains that they could have waited for this process to take place, but McCabe points out that they're not the types of people that like to wait. Van Stoker asks how he's involved in this, and Misaki tells him that in order for them to get their own wing of the library, they needed to throw out some of the existing legends from the Westerners. But something went wrong in the process, and she puts down two books, one called Consulting Detective, and one called Hunter of Vampires. She explains that the two books combined into one, and fled the library in a desperate attempt to survive. Chiaki tells him that his time has come to an end, and McCabe draws a hunting knife, but Misaki motions for him to stop. Chiaki closes both of the books, and Von Stoker disappears, and Misaki tells her to put the books back on the shelf, as they have earned their place. Misaki sits alone at a dark table in a warehouse, sipping tea. A figure dressed in black steps forward, and she nods, indicating that her newly arrived guest should be allowed in. Mei Fang approaches the table, and Misaki chastises her for failing to accomplish her assignment in time. Mei Fang insists that she's loyal to the Ten Thunders, but simply doesn't have the manpower to complete the Underground Railroad in time while hiding everything from the Union. Misaki tells her that they don't have infinite resources for her to squander, but then decides to take a softer tone. She tells the woman that they're all counting on her, and that she's an important part of the Ten Thunders. She invites the woman to sit down and have a cup of tea, and Mei Fang says that her men are overworked, and that they're dying in the process, but that she would kill Ramos and the other Union members in cold blood, and go back to working when the time comes. She would do this because the Oyabun commands it. Misaki says that she will fight beside her when that day comes, but that they aren't ready yet, and they have to continue with the plan. They're soon joined by Jacob Lynch, who is escorted by 3 armed assassins. The man sits down at the table without being invited, and Mei Fang stands up with her fist balled, but Misaki motions for her to let it go. Jacob prompts Misaki to introduce herself, but she refuses and simply invites him to have some tea. He then asks why he was brought here, and the woman tells him that she needs some information. He asks what she wants to know from him, and a disembodied voice replies nothing, explaining that the information will not come from him. Yan Lo appears, and Mei Fang and the guards kneel out of respect, while Misaki simply bows her head. Yan Lo tells Jacob that he would speak to the other, but Jacob insists that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Yan Lo asks more firmly, and Jacob's eyes roll back in his head, and a voice speaks through him. The old man explains that an evil is awakening, and the hungering darkness acts nonchalant, until Yan Lo tells him that it's an evil that almost destroyed the hungering darkness in the past. The creature says that they have been imprisoned and can't come back, but Yan Lo tells him that he has seen it, and that they will come back and lay waste to the world. He tells the hungering darkness that he will help them or die alongside them. The hungering darkness explains that he didn't survive through strength, but through guile and hiding, and that no one can defeat the tyrants, not even he. Yan Lo explains that they don't want him to fight, but that he was there when they were last defeated, and he's going to tell them how to trap them. Ototo watches as Misaki leads one of her lieutenants into their garden to have a meeting. He can already tell by the lack of refreshments that Misaki is angry. As soon as they sit down, Misaki starts telling the man that she doesn't like his methods, as he's too crass and brings unwanted attention to their organization. The man counters that he was sent from Earthside by the Oyabun because she prefers to hide in the shadow of the guild, fighting over scraps, while he is a real man. Misaki calls him a fool and explains that he's underestimating the guild, and he counters that in the few weeks that he's been in Malifaux, he's expanded his territory considerably. Misaki shoots back that of the rival gangs that he's defeated, several were weak anyway, and the rest could have been folded into their own forces, as opposed to being destroyed. The only message that his behavior has sent is one that tells the guild that he's an idiot. The man tells Misaki that she ought to be careful, as being the Oyabun's daughter will only excuse so much. At this threat, Ototo steps forward, prepared to kill the man where he sits, but Misaki gives him a subtle signal to stand down. She tells the man that she's made herself clear, and that he is to follow her directions going forward, or else be removed from his position. The man makes a mocking bow, and turns and leaves. Misaki stands there quietly for some time as Ototo waits for the order he knows is coming. When she's ready, she tells him to go to the Storm Garden, where this lieutenant could be found, and teach him a lesson that their ways are better. Ototo asks what to do if he refuses to listen, and Misaki replies, "Bury him." Jacob Lynch receives a letter purporting to be from Lucius Matheson and requesting a meeting, but he knows immediately that it's a forgery. One of Lucius's employees arrives for the meeting and asks to be put in contact with Lynch's superiors. Lynch takes him to meet with Misaki, and she asks him why he's risked his life and freedom to come and speak with her, and he tells them that his life has been in their hands ever since he wrote that letter. Lynch asks the man what he would like them to smuggle for him, and the man looks surprised, but he explains that they've been tracking his activities, and they know that he's been studying the guild's new train schedules. They also know that when that didn't get him the results he wanted, he went to speak to Colette Dubois, but apparently that was also a dead end for him. The man then surprises them in return, when he tells them that the Thunders are probably his best option, since they don't have to move things through the breach as they possess their own. Misaki and Lynch are both surprised, as this is a closely guarded secret, but the man explains that Lucius Matheson is very well informed, and that he's been able to pick up on some of the clues. They press him further, trying to figure out what it is that he'd like smuggled to Malifaux, and the man tells him that he actually wants something smuggled back to Earthside, and that something is himself. Misaki and Lynch are once again surprised, and they tell him that they've met many people who are desperate to leave Malifaux, but usually they're not in a position of power and authority like he is. They ask what it is that the guild is up to that's got him so scared, and he tells them everything. They learn of the Governor General's plot to try to become a tyrant, and soon the organization has hatched their own plan to try to sabotage his efforts. As the Governor General tries to ascend to tyranthood, and is overwhelmed by the surge of power, he merges with the tyrant Shirufe and creates the Burning Man. Across the city, Misaki sits in a room alone, trying to meditate. The room around her is in shambles, and every time she opens her eyes, her thoughts become lightning flashes, and every time she speaks, there's a thunderclap. She's almost demolished the building, but she's convinced herself to not give in to fear, and focuses on trying to calm herself. Sitting behind her, and mimicking her posture, is a wooden puppet, dressed as a Torokage. Misaki hears a commotion, and stops to question some of her guards as to what's going on. Before they can answer her, a figure comes crashing down the hallway, leaving a trail of smoke and the sound of laughter behind it. She slashes at it with her Basento, but it ignores the blow, and then leaps out a nearby window. As it falls, it begins to change shape and transforms into a mighty dragon. Nicodem led an undead horde against the guild, who was struggling to resist them and losing territory. Misaki watched from the Little Kingdom and realized that she had to do something. It was always good for her when her enemies fought each other, but she couldn't allow the undead to take over the city, as they wouldn't be as predictable or easy to exploit as the guild. She led a strike team against the flank of the undead horde, and once she did enough damage, she fell back and disappeared. The guild assumed that they won on their own, and the Thunders never revealed their true strength. When Misaki returned to the Little Kingdom, her father, the Oyabun, chastised her for acting on her impulses without speaking to him first. She tried to explain her reasoning, but he just struck her in the face, telling her that he was looking for obedience, not excuses. Misaki disappeared into the night, realizing that it was impossible for her to continue to ignore her father's ignorance, as it was a real threat to the 10 Thunders. If she was going to have any success solving this problem, she was going to need allies. When several mercenary groups across the city have a meeting to discuss what they'll do about the new Governor General's ban on mercenary work and bounty hunting, Misaki sends a Woku raider as her representative. The raider meets with Vanessa Chambers in private and tells her that Misaki does not think it's a good time to move against the guild yet, but adds that when the time is right, Lady Misaki will support any action that she and her sisters deem appropriate. She asks him why he decided to tell her this in private and not announce it to the room, and he replies that Misaki believes in subtlety, and while she feels certain affinity for her and her family, there are others in the room who may need to be culled. If you're enjoying this video, then please be sure to give it a like and make sure you subscribe to the channel and consider sharing it around with some friends who you think might find it interesting. You can also check out all of the important links in the description below, including my Wyrd affiliate link where you can make purchases on their web store, like if you want to pick up a Misaki core box, and any purchases that you make through that link will actually go to support the channel at no extra cost to you. We also have the merch store where you can buy Defective Dice merchandise, and a link to the Patreon where you can support the channel directly and get a whole bunch of different perks. I'm going to be putting up some polls in the near future about the next characters that I'm going to cover in this series, so if you'd like to have some influence on what characters get prioritized and which ones you see sooner rather than later, then definitely check out that link. But with that, let's get right back into the video. The Little Kingdom is celebrating the success of the Boxer Rebellion Earthside, but some of their celebrations threatened to turn into protests against the guild's power in Malifaux, and there was fear that the guild would institute martial law. The Oyabun summons Misaki, and when she arrives at the sake house, he tells her to celebrate with him. She says that it's not time to celebrate, as the guild's power is only slipping Earthside, but they're still just as much of a threat in Malifaux. He says that he's not celebrating their defeat on Earth, but their coming defeat in Malifaux. She tells him that the other factions are in chaos, and that if they choose now to meddle in their affairs, it will only result in unpredictable outcomes. Her father says that that makes it the perfect time for them to make their move. Misaki tries to object again, but he stands and slaps her in the face, telling her to remember her place. Her rage at the insult is only eclipsed by her anger, knowing that he was going to get many of their operatives killed. Everyone in the sake house was on edge, expecting her to strike him back, except for one woman who was drinking at the Oyabun's side and looks amused at the situation. Misaki simply smiles and then leaves. A day later, she requests a meeting with her father's generals, feigning a desire to help, but secretly wanting to fish for information. She hopes that their desire to gloat at her disfavor would be enough to make them talk, even if they suspected she had other intentions. 5 of them arrive at the meeting, including the Oyabun's newest general, the same woman who was drinking with him the day before, by the name of Sukon. Misaki tells the generals that she wants to know her father's plan, feigning humility, and they ask her why. She says that she and the Last Blossom have learned of their enemies firsthand, and that she could give them valuable advice about how to defeat them. She adds that if she does a good job, maybe her father won't be so ashamed of her. The other generals protest, but Sukon agrees, and explains that she plans to send some Illuminated into the forest to attack some Fey creatures. They'll make it look like the attack was done by the Nephilim, in hopes that they can stoke a civil war between different factions of the Neverborn. In addition, they'll spike their water supply with brilliance, and cause many of them to get addicted to the substance. One of the other generals calls this plan too gentle, and Misaki asks how he plans to deal with the gremlins. He says that the gremlins have no leadership, and that one of his agents has sabotaged their efforts to unite by making sure a dim-witted gremlin got elected to a position of power. Misaki says that they are underestimating the gremlins, and that some of them may pose a threat, including the one with the 3 demons bag, who might be planning to release Ling Shutzi, a powerful Oni demon. The general seems surprised at this information, but deflects by accusing one of the others of having a bad plan that's just a train heist. She says that stealing a shipment of soulstones will cause the guild to dock the pay of many guards, which will undermine their confidence in their employer and make them susceptible to the syndicate's bribes. Misaki turns to another of the generals and asks what the status of the Arcanist is now that Ramos is gone. He explains that they're led by either Ironsides or Karis, depending on who you ask, and adds that his people have begun agitating the miners and that one is sure to put a blade in Ironside's back. He goes on to say that they'll kill Ramos in his cell and make it look like Karis did it to silence him, thus causing even more of a rift in the organization. Misaki then asks the last general for his plan, and he explains that the powerful resurrectionists tend to go out at night, so he'll use the opportunity to plant explosives in their lairs. When they return, they'll be killed, and hopefully take a chunk of the quarantine zone with them. He adds that he'll use Toshiro to plant the bombs, and Misaki objects to the use of her ancestor's corpse in this way. The man explains that the resurrectionists have wards up and undead guards to protect their lairs from intruders, and that Toshiro is the only one that can bypass these defenses, and who is honorable enough to do the job. Misaki asks about Karai, and the general tells her that she went to Earth, where the Thunders tracked her to Vietnam, and they'll know if she heads back to Malifaux. Misaki says that it seems they all have plans, and that the Little Kingdom will soon be just as free as their companions Earthside. She apologizes for wasting their time and doubting them, and offers them any aid that they might need. All but one of the generals gets up and leaves, only Sukon remains. She smiles at Misaki and comments that they've all accidentally divulged their plans to her, and adds that she trusts Misaki will keep them a secret, before turning to leave herself. Yamaziko moves through the Knotwoods. She came on the mission not for Misaki, but because the Oyabun's plan was reckless, and the power vacuum it would cause would be worse than the alternative. She hears fighting ahead, and comes up on her fourth group of Illuminated of the night, who are standing over two dead creatures with bark-like armor. Yamaziko uses her Yari to attack, killing all three Illuminated one by one, and then searches their bodies. She finds several flasks of poison that they were carrying, and adds them to the rest of her collection, before moving on to find another group. When Misaki had approached Kang about his assignment, he was cautious. Loyalty was important in the Ten Thunders, but Misaki pointed out that Mei Fang and the Oyabun didn't like each other anyway. When she explained that they had planned to sabotage the rail lines, it was all Kang needed to hear. He had great respect for the railroad, and the work that his men put into building it, and he didn't like the idea of destroying it. He and his rail workers approach a damaged section of the track, with a stationary train behind it that's under attack by the Ten Thunders. The guild guards are trying to fight them off, and Kang tells his men to fix the track as he takes care of the train. When he approaches, 3 Ten Thunders brothers jump down, and tell him that he's interfering with the Oyabun's plans. He makes a sarcastic reply and then challenges them, and they all attack. He's injured in the process, but he takes down all 3, and soon the damaged section of track has been repaired. He gives a signal to the train conductor, and many of the attacking Thunders flee in surprise as the train starts moving again. As they pass, the guild guards cheer for Kang and his men. Sadir approaches the Malifaux Gaul, and the guards try to stop his progress. He says that he has authorization, he outranks them, and he doesn't think that they could stop him even if he didn't. They check his paperwork and let him by, asking if he's with the other group that they just let in. In response, Sadir picks up his pace. He heads inside, feeling quite comfortable in this place, as he's spent much time in prison before. He passes a desk, and a guard calls out his name, apparently recognizing him. Sadir turns to find a guard who he had previously stabbed during his time in prison, and the man nervously asks what he's doing there. He says that he came to see Ramos, and the man insists on taking his gun, as Sadir rushes him along to go to the prison cells. They turn a corner and see 4 people in front of a cell, with a guard on the ground by their side. They have several cases open, and have just finished assembling a flamethrower. When they see Sadir, they start shooting at him, and he grabs the guard and uses him as a shield to close the distance. He attacks the group with his blade, getting burned in the process, but successfully takes care of all 4. When he looks up, he sees Victor Ramos, who asks if he's there to free him, and Sadir replies no, of course not, as he's a criminal. Toshiro makes his way through the quarantine zone with some undead. He thinks about how the Oyabun had not treated him with the proper respect when giving him this assignment. He's interrupted when Sukon approaches him, and reveals her true identity as Manako Rei, the last member of the Order of Balance. He recognizes her order, and asks if he is her quarry, as it would be a great honor to fight a member of her organization. She says no, but that the Oyabun has fallen from the path of righteousness, and that she needs to stop him from completing his mission. Toshiro says that her concerns echo his own doubt, and she adds that the Oyabun's daughter does follow the path of righteousness. Toshiro is conflicted, as he was once betrayed himself, and so he values loyalty greatly. But he decides that if the Order stands with Misaki, then his mission will fail. Misaki returns to the sake house, this time with her head held a little higher. Her father yells her name, and everyone in the sake house goes silent. He demands to know what she did to make his plans fail, and she says that she's been under his watch the whole time, and couldn't have had anything to do with it. He strikes her, and insists that she sent their agents to foil his plans, and she counters that he shouldn't admit that he's losing control of his men so loud in front of other people, as they might start to question his leadership. He then tells her that she's being cast out, of both the Ten Thunders and their family, and is no longer a Katanaka. Misaki holds her head high and tells him that this insult to her honor is too much, and she challenges him to a duel to refute his claims. He refuses, saying that old traditions need to be discarded, but everyone in the room starts to whisper, their respect for his position slipping, as they all greatly value their traditions. Misaki tells him that their past defines their future, and that their traditions need to be embraced. The room seems to agree, and the Oyabun's hand is forced, so he tells her that they'll duel to the death in 1 week. Misaki stands in the hidden temple facing her father. She second-guesses her choices, doubting her ability to win the duel, and wondering what will happen even if she does. She turns to look at the few people who are in her corner: McCabe, Sadir, Mei Fang, Asami, and Jacob Lynch. They've all sided with her, a show of defiance against the Oyabun, and Misaki hopes to herself that she won't make them regret their decision. On the other side of the room, supporting her father, is a much larger crowd of many different members of the Ten Thunders. She turns back and feels herself shaking, but Yamazuko approaches and tells her to steel herself, as she is the coming storm. Misaki feels her confidence returning, and Ototo approaches as well, touching her chest and telling her that she has the thunder now. She faces her father, and Shenlong announces the beginning of the duel. Misaki and the Oyabun both bow and look each other in the eyes. She feels the wind behind her, and hears the sound of thunder as she draws her blade, her feet moving on their own, propelling her across the room. Her father's head hits the ground at her feet before he has even had the chance to draw his sword. She bows to his corpse, and Sukon quickly approaches her from the crowd and kneels at her feet. She swears her service to the new Oyabun, but the other generals begin shouting in anger, and some reach for their weapons. Misaki silences them and tells them that her regime will not be one of fools, and then commands her people to end them. McCabe and Sadir draw their guns. Mei Fang crouches and jumps forward. Lynch's eyes roll back in his head, and Asami's hair rises up and snaps forward. Misaki walks with 2 Torakage through a crowd of people, searching for her target. The crowd stiffens as she approaches, and the people part in front of her. They recognize her and know exactly who she is, and what she did to claim her birthright. The Ten Thunders' profits have soared since her takeover, partly due to her incorporation of rival gangs. Some joined out of hope that she would be a wiser leader than her father, but many joined out of fear after she killed one of the most powerful and ruthless men in the Little Kingdom. But one gang, the Black Dahlias, had not joined up. One of her Torakage, a young woman by the name of Akiko, who Misaki had a particular affection for, points out a group of 5 men dressed in black. Misaki charges across the square and jumps onto a fountain, sending a shockwave through the crowd and causing the people to scatter. She tells the leader of the Black Dahlias that he can be forgiven for killing one of her people if he will only reconsider her offer of partnership, adding that his family doesn't have to suffer. He replies that he is not a pawn. The 2 Torakage face off against one of his men each, and Misaki takes on 2 at once. She takes one down with her Basento, and then notices that one of her Torakage had been killed, and Akiko is facing off against 2 opponents. She manages to kill one of them, and Misaki kills her other foe, as Akiko successfully takes down the last. But suddenly, the leader of the Black Dahlias grabs her from behind and puts a blade to her throat. He threatens to kill her, and Misaki tells him to let her go, and to consider the possibilities if the Thunders and the Dahlias work together. The man tells her that she does not deserve their loyalty, and that even now her own people are questioning her leadership, and one of her pets is conspiring against her. Misaki freezes, and then calls him a liar. Akiko calls out to Misaki to do what she must, and then drives her throat into the man's blade. In a flash, Misaki swings her Basento and cuts the man in 2, and then disappears in a puff of smoke as a guild peacekeeper approaches. Minako Rei tells Misaki that she no longer has to do this type of work, and she could have sent Ototo. Misaki replies that they have a traitor in their midst, and Rei says that she shouldn't believe a desperate killer, but adds that she can't run the risk of not investigating. As Rei sharpens her blade, she comments that if she had known the Dahlias were part of a conspiracy, she would have advised Misaki to take their leader alive. Misaki says that wasn't an option after he killed 2 of her people, and then questions why people would betray her, and whether she is a better Oyabun than her father, wondering if she shouldn't have killed him. Minako Rei replies that she doesn't even know if there is a betrayal, but also that her father's pride made him weak, and she simply exploited that fact. Misaki questions whether he was right to be viciously paranoid, and she asks Rei how to manage her agents when they're all pursuing their own agendas. Misaki answers her own question: fear. Minako Rei starts to explain that his people likely had other reasons for following him, but Misaki cuts her off to tell a story. When she was 13, her father presented her to a government official who owed him money as a gift. He gave her a beautiful kimono to wear, and on top of it was a note: his life or your honor. Choose. Rei asks what happened, and Misaki says that she returned to her father with the man's head in a sack. That night she couldn't sleep, and Yamazuko rocked her to sleep on her shoulder as she dreamt about the man. it wasn't even the first time she had killed. She picks up her Pacento and explains that all of her agents are under suspicion and that fear is the only way to keep them together. Minako Rei puts a hand on her shoulder and warns her that questioning all of her most loyal agents might send the wrong message and also alert the potential mole. Misaki says her father would have just tortured them all until the traitor confessed. Rei replies that there's another way and it doesn't involve a blade. Minako Rei and Misaki approach the Key and Gong, a long-standing tea house and brothel that attracts clients from all around the city. Some of the windows are boarded up, and a sign says closed for repairs, and Misaki asks what happened. Rei says that it's a story for another time, but her contact still wants to meet. They walk inside, and a silky voice greets them. Misaki turns to see one of the most beautiful women she's ever seen, dressed in an ornate kimono. She looks the woman over, and is almost sure that the parasol she's carrying conceals a katana. Rei thanks the woman for meeting them, and Yuko gives Misaki a glare, and says not to thank her yet, as she sees Rei has brought undesirable company. Misaki asks Rei who the hell she is, and then asks the woman if she knows who she's talking to. Minako Rei introduces her as Yuko Hamasaki, owner of the Key and Gong, and Misaki is surprised, explaining that her agents have been trying to identify her for a long time, and she's even visited the Key and Gong a dozen times and never seen her. Yuko says that she's only known to those who she wants to be known to, and she only took this meeting because she owes Rei a favor. Her establishment is friendly to people from all around the city, and she doesn't want to owe allegiance to anyone, as it would be bad for business. She adds that she likes to hide in plain sight, unlike Misaki, and refers to her encounter with the Black Dahlias the day before. Misaki pushes and asks how no one has noticed her, given all of this, and she motions to the woman's appearance and fancy dress. She speculates that it must be some kind of magic. Yuko responds that she doesn't always dress this way, and says that it isn't magic, she just uses people's biases and judgments against them. Misaki is skeptical, so Yuko asks her a question, explaining that she has a friend who is meek and antisocial, has neat handwriting, and has an understanding of math. She asks Misaki if her friend is more likely to be a bookkeeper or a farmer. Misaki is reluctant to answer, but when Yuko insists, she says that he's obviously more likely to be a bookkeeper. Yuko tells her that she's wrong, he's a farmer. The question was not which job he's more suited to, but the probability, and there are 1,000 farmers for every one bookkeeper. She adds that Misaki didn't consider that, because our minds are quick to make certain judgments and use shortcuts. The Oyabun says that she doesn't understand, and Yuko explains that she dresses and acts like her employees during the day, so no one suspects she's anything but a server girl. Misaki's amused and tells her to go on. Yuko poses another question, true or false? All lotuses are flowers, some flowers fade quickly, and therefore some lotuses fade quickly. Misaki thinks for a minute and then says true. Yuko replies false, and tells her to think about the second line. She never said that lotuses are part of the group of flowers that fade quickly. Humans always want to confirm their biases, rather than question them. That's why no one asks who's in charge, they just assume she's an employee because she looks and acts like one. She asks if Misaki wants another example, and Misaki says she'll take one more. Yuko explains that she will give 3 numbers that are related in some way, and Misaki can then give her 3 numbers, and she will confirm if they have the same relationship. She can test it as many times as she wants, until she thinks she knows the relationship. She then gives the numbers 2, 4, and 8. Misaki thinks, and then gives back the numbers 3, 9, and 27, and Yuko nods. Misaki then asks 4, 16, 64, and Yuko nods again. She then asks again 5, 25, 125, and Yuko confirms. Misaki says that the answer is obvious and that the numbers are consecutive squares. Yuko tells her once again that she's wrong, and Misaki protests that they are consecutive squares, and then asks what the answer is. Yuko explains that they're just increasing numbers, and then starts laughing, explaining that Misaki could have said 1, 2, 3, but like most people, she overcomplicated things. She only asked questions to confirm her first suspicion. People are easy to exploit because they're predictable and never learn to adapt. Misaki says that her tricks are all well and good, but they won't help her out in the streets or in a fight. The woman shoots back that she can also take advantage of humans' limited attention span, and when Misaki asks what she means, Yuko explains that she's been so focused for the last few minutes that she didn't even notice her. Misaki turns to find a woman holding a knife to Minako Rei's throat. Yuko points out that Misaki didn't even notice her giving the signal for one of her girls to appear, and then she waves off the girl, who disappears back into the shadows. Yuko finally asks the two of them why they're here. Minako Rei tells her that she is the eyes and ears of the Little Kingdom, and they have reason to believe that they've been betrayed by one of their senior operatives. Yuko responds sarcastically, saying she can't believe that there's subterfuge within a crime syndicate, and Rei asks her to take it seriously, reminding her of how she saved the Key and Gong from Manos and his disciples. She adds that she isn't asking Yuko to compromise her secrecy, and Yuko replies that it's her integrity she's worried about. The woman thinks for a moment, and then tells Misaki that there will be a gathering in the mountains north of Promise in 3 days, that she ought to attend. Rei is confused, but Misaki asks what she'll find at the Ten Thunders breach facility, and Yuko tells her that it isn't what, but who. She tells Ray that her debt has been paid and then escorts the two women out. The hidden temple sits in the cliffside overlooking the town of Promise, far north of Malifaux City. A few kilometers behind it, in a rift in the mountains, is the Ten Thunders' secret breach. Misaki watches in secret as rail workers stand around a dozen metal golems, wielding swords and shields with the sigil of the Empress of China. Walking up and down and inspecting them is Mei Fang. Once the woman seems satisfied, she snaps her fingers and the metal golem's boilers spark to life. Mei Fang announces to the crowd that they have kept their secret long enough, and tonight they march to China. The golems start to move, but Misaki bursts out from her hiding place and yells for them to stop. At the same time, a group of her hand-picked people appear from the smoke. In response, the rail workers raise their metal limbs and weapons. Mei Fang asks her who ratted them out, and Misaki makes a reference to the Black Dahlia leader. Mei Fang curses Lien for trusting him, and Misaki tells her that she has 1 minute to explain what's going on here before she takes her head, adding that the metal golems are Thunder's property and asking if she thinks she can really get the whole foundry to desert them. Mei Fang says that there's been a call to join the Three Kingdoms coalition and that they have answered. They're going home to help China fight against the insects who are falling from the skies and the cultists who worship the spirit in the sky. She asks if Misaki has forgotten about their home, and Misaki shoots back that this is their home. She tells Mei Fang that she hasn't forgotten about the suffering of those on Earth and reminds her of how her father saved Mei Fang and her brother when the guild killed their parents. Mei Fang fires back that they didn't need saving, and steam starts to shoot out from her, cloaking the two women from the spectators. Misaki orders her people not to do anything, and Mei Fang asks her who built Promise, gave refuge to the Opium War refugees, and who became the people's champion and stood against Kitchener at the height of his power. In response, the rail workers let out a cheer of support. Misaki insists that her father gave Mei all those things, and that she didn't take them away when she took over power. She asks why the woman would betray her, and Mei Fang tells her that fighting for her country isn't betrayal. They came to Malifaux to escape the bad treatment of imperialists, but since coming, they've been enslaved to her father and suffered even worse treatment. Misaki is surprised at this and asks her to explain, and Mei Fang says that the former Oyabun started the rebellion in China so he could take advantage of the refugees, and the Japanese have always mistreated them. Misaki challenges her, saying that if that's true, then she is the one who's been torturing them for protection money, and asking if all of her people are just sheep who follow her blindly. Mei says that they no longer want to work for a crime syndicate, and Misaki tells her that she's made her choice then, and attacks with her Basento. Mei Fang defends with her claws, and then counterattacks. Sparks and magical shockwaves fly out as they fight, and as they trade blows, Mei tells Misaki that she must know that Mei can't stop. Misaki says that she's left her no choice, and Mei slashes with her claws and hits the handle of the Basento, shattering the shaft. But at the same time, the blade comes across and cuts her deep on her thigh. She collapses, and the steam clears, and all of her men see her laying on the ground bleeding. Misaki holds what's left of her weapon, and tries to hide her limp as she approaches. Mei Fang implores her to end her, and she feels her breathing growing ragged, and knows that the blade must have been coated in something. Misaki tells the woman that she has to pay for her betrayal, and Mei says that she would suffer the same pain 1,000 times before becoming a lapdog. Misaki lifts her blade and thrusts, but then stays her hand. She tells the woman that she does not want to spare her, but that she's also not her father, and she drops her blade. She explains that she now sees that Mei's betrayal was her own fault, and that if she had known what her father had done, she would have stopped it. She offers Mei Fang a hand up, and Mei takes it with a look of shock and disbelief, but also respect. Misaki addresses the crowd, and then whispers to Mei Fang that her assignment will remain the same. She cannot go to Earth, but Misaki will allow her to periodically send limited assets to Earth to support China. She asks if that is worse than dying. Mei Fang replies that she's humiliated her in front of her men, and that she can't return home, and then asks her to kill her, as this is a fate worse than death. Misaki replies good, that's the point, and some warmth returns to her voice as she adds that if Mei Fang ever thinks about killing herself, she should remember how many people in the foundry are counting on her, as well as her country. She explains that she doesn't care where any of them are from, it's only where they're going that matters. Mei Fang replies, yes, my Oyabun. When Misaki returns to the Qiangong, it's bustling with customers. She sees Yuko dressed as a serving girl, and when she notices Misaki, she nods to a side room. As they sit together, Yuko says that she heard her visit to Promise was eventful. Misaki says that she did what had to be done, and Yuko tells her that she's glad she spared Lady Fang's life, so a strong woman can go on to inspire her people and fight for her homeland. Misaki explains that things will be different now. Her father's gone, and she wants it to stay that way. Yuko agrees, calling him a rat bastard, and then asks Misaki why she thinks she decided to tell her about the foundry. Misaki says that that's what she came to ask, adding that she thinks it's one of Yuko's riddles. Yuko says that she's partly correct, this was a game, but this time Yuko was the player. She reiterates that people are always trying to prove their own biases, but that she's not like that. She sent Misaki to Promise not to see if she would kill her friend, but to test whether she wouldn't. She says that Misaki isn't her father, and Minako Rei speaks highly of her. Plus, she had owed her a favor. Misaki asks why she was testing her in the first place, and Yuko says that with her father gone, she suspected that it was time for her to come out of the shadows. Misaki is about to invite her to join the Ten Thunders, but Yuko holds her hand up and insists that she survives because she does not owe anyone allegiance. This experiment had promising results, but she will not join the Thunders. Misaki says that she had to ask, but that she doesn't think that they'll be able to stay independent forever in a place like Malifaux where everyone is connected by fate. Yuko says that the Thunders have done terrible things, and Misaki tells her that they will likely do more in the future, but that she isn't a butcher, and that she would pay Yuko well. The woman asks what they would have her do if she joined the Thunders, and Misaki tells her that she wants Yuko to teach her. Yuko agrees, and says that her first lesson that she needs to learn is that she's more to her people than just the Oyabun, and that if she had had a closer relationship with Mei Fang in the Foundry, they may not have betrayed her in the first place. Misaki asks what she's getting at, and Yuko tells her that her gambler friend could use a visit as he's running out of cards to play. Misaki and her Basento had once been inseparable, having grown up together from the time when she was 7. Now it had lain alone for weeks in her quarters, after being repaired from the damage that Mei Fang did to it. Misaki's new role as leader had taken her away from frontline duty, and she had been spending time poring over maps, ledgers, and contracts. She's planning the assassination of a Union boss, who has almost discovered Mei Fang's shipments of metal golems to China. The proposed plan to kill him was foolish. They can't take him out while he's holed up. They would need to wait until he goes to the honeypot. A familiar voice tells her that she should have killed Mei Fang when she had the chance. Her continued support of the Chinese Empress is a big risk. She tells them to hold their tongue, and insists that killing Mei Fang would have lost her eyes and ears in the Arcanus. Keeping her alive maintains control. The voice tells her that they need to forget about Earth and focus on their interest in Malifaux. Leaving her alive only indicated how weak Misaki really is. She should have killed her and set an example to sow fear. Misaki shoots back that a Japanese woman killing the champion of the Chinese would have only strained their alliance even more than it already is. The voice cuts her off to say that the rail workers now think that they're too important to kill, and they won't hesitate to betray her again. Misaki insists that she did what was right and honorable, which is more than the speaker could ever say. The voice tells her that she's losing her grip. First the gremlin left, then Lynch almost died in an attack they didn't see coming. Who would be next? McCabe seems very fond of his new employer. How long can Asami resist the curse that ties her to the Kamon? Misaki replies that she will not doubt her best agents again. There's a knock at the door, and Misaki beckons them to enter. One of her senior Torakage comes in and bows, and gives her a confused look as he scans the empty room. He asks if she's okay, and when she insists that she is, he hands her a stack of stamped papers and reports that the monthly tributes from the other syndicates have all been accounted for. She tells him that Ototo will be disappointed, but that she is pleased. He looks around the empty room and gives her another confused look, and then asks her who she was speaking to. As if someone had gotten into her quarters without him knowing, he would be mortified. Misaki says that she hasn't had any guests, and then dismisses him. When she turns around, a blue flame erupts from Shang, and it turns into the form of her father, sitting in a chair, holding his disembodied head. He tells her that he's real even if she can't always see him, and that a part of him will always be with her, a fractured part of her that cannot die. Misaki insists that he means nothing to her, and that she killed him, and Yuko is teaching her to be better. She's healing. He says that she doesn't need to heal. She's just as he made her, and he asks if she remembers what she learned all those years ago, as her mind drifts into a memory. She fights a fiery angel, and struggles to defend against its ferocious and random attacks. She tries to counter, but she's too predictable, and the foe dodges her easily. Then she's being dragged up into the air, and the woman is telling her that control is an illusion. She starts to fall, but then suddenly she's back in her office, and it's her father's fiery form that's holding her arm. He tells her that now that she remembers, they can begin again. He disappears, leaving only an ashen palm print on her arm, telling her to forget what she knew before. Sometimes you have to fall to fly. The same Torakage bursts into the room and calls out to her. He tells her that the sky is on fire and that they need to get her to safety. When she doesn't answer, he approaches, and when she turns, he sees flames dancing in her eyes and her makeup running. Smoke floats out from under her robes, and she holds her broken Basento, this time destroyed by her own hands. He asks if she heard him, and she calmly replies yes, and asks him to get her another cup of tea. Rumors had been spreading since the Burning Man's arrival about Misaki. They say she's been getting more and more reclusive, and has begun talking to herself in private. When Lin Li enters the Katanaka trading house, she finds that it's less busy than she remembered, and notices a smoky atmosphere, with warding symbols and charms hanging around. She's led to the second floor, and to the inner sanctum of the Oyabun. Misaki greets her warmly, and she tells the woman to come and sit and have a cup of tea. Lin Li notices charm warders sitting on either side of the room chanting. She senses a dark presence and feels uneasy. Misaki thanks Lin for her research into the Kamon that she's been doing as the keeper of the Red Library. Lin says that she's glad to be of service, and that she hopes that they've seen the last of the Burning Man, as he had recently disappeared. Misaki says that he'll be back, and that every time he returns, she loses herself. Everything unravels, and she's finding it harder and harder to put herself back together. Suddenly, she grabs a small object and throws it at the wall, as she yells out in response to a statement that Lin didn't hear. The woman is startled by the outburst, and the warders start chanting more intently. The room slowly calms down, and when Misaki sees her alarm, she tells Lin that she's just fine. She explains that Yanlo and Asami have benefited from her research, and that she is to tell her people to continue looking for any info they can find on the Kamon. Lin says that she will continue to look, but Misaki cuts her off and says no, this is a task for the others. She is to look into the Burning Man. The library favors her and might reveal secret information. Lin had heard many things about the Burning Man, but most of all, the warning never to read the words. She tells Misaki that the library only knows the past, and that if there was any info on the Burning Man, they would have reported it already. The Oyabun states that when they first discovered the library, her father had Yanlo separate their section, the Red Library, and it is untouched by the Burning Man's influence. But the rest of the library is where she needs to look. Lin protests, saying that they don't know what is in the other branches, and she's even forbidden other researchers from venturing out there. Misaki's speech gets more unnatural, and she tells Lin that the fires are coming, and that she is not to question her Oyabun. She must fulfill her duty to the Thunders. The warders chant louder, and Misaki closes her eyes and tries to meditate as things calm once again. She speaks more softly, telling the librarian that she wouldn't put her at risk, but that Lin has a connection to the library, and her work has exceeded their expectations. She may be the only one who can do this. Lin says that she will do her best, and they bow to each other before Misaki tells her that she's dismissed. As she turns to leave, Misaki calls out to her, and she freezes. The Oyabun tells Lin that she expects her to be silent about Misaki's condition. Lin replies that she can trust her, and Misaki says good, as she would hate it if something had to happen to her otherwise. McCabe arrives unexpectedly at the Katanaka trading house and requests to speak to Misaki about the Burning Man. He's escorted into her chambers and finds Misaki kneeling over a parchment with a calligraphy brush in her hand. He stands there for a moment and then clears his throat, and she looks up as he tells her that it's quite the operation she has here, and that there have been rumors about her being gripped by madness. She asks him how he replies to those rumors, and he says that he doesn't know anything, hasn't seen anything, and isn't interested in finding out. He asks if she's feeling better, and she says that his influence is waning. She then adds that if people suspect weakness, it may be better for her to let them continue thinking that, in order to see what they'll do about it. McCabe says that besides, he may be back any day, and then where will she be? Misaki freezes, and then tells him that he's intruding on her schedule, and the least he could do is have some patience. He says that they're all busy, and he wants to get this over with fast so they can all get back to their business. He tells her that Gretchen of the Explorer Society is gathering pieces for some big machine, and Misaki asks him why he's troubling her with this. He says it has something to do with banishing the Burning Man, and when Misaki doesn't respond, he adds that they're sending him out into the wilds to find some sort of cache. The Oyabun tells him to make sure he is part of that expedition, and to ensure that it succeeds. McCabe asks about payment, and Misaki says that the Thunders remember those that are loyal to them, and those who seek only profit. He's betrayed his loyalties, and they can consider this and act on his road to redemption. McCabe says that's fair enough, and promises to send Wyrd back. She dismisses him, and he turns and leaves. A moment later, a Torakage appears in the doorway, and Misaki tells him to follow McCabe to make sure that he fulfills his obligations and doesn't speak a word of any of this. Misaki's a character that I find really interesting. She's one of the most dynamic characters in all of Malifaux because she changes a lot over the course of the time that we know her. When we first get introduced to her, she's kind of this rebellious kid who's trying to decide whether she wants to follow in her father's footsteps and do what her family wants, or if she's going to go do her own thing and kind of abandon the family legacy. And one of the things that I find really interesting about her character is how that first story that we see her in really foreshadows the way that her character is going to make decisions in the future. She's all about this structure and discipline and everything, but then when she has that interaction with Karis, she decides to incorporate a little bit of chaos into her fighting style, and that middle of the road choice ends up becoming the way that she approaches the rest of the decisions she has to make. She always seems to try to make her own path instead of taking the two obvious choices that are presented to her. And we see that when she decides to take over for the 10 Thunders and start doing things much differently than the way her father did things. It becomes a really important part of her character for the rest of her lore, where she's kind of undoing a lot of the bad things that her father was doing when he was running the Thunders. And we especially see that in the story and her interaction with Mei Fang, where her dad was pretty racist and treating the Chinese people like shit, and Misaki is trying to kind of walk that back and undo some of the damage that he did. Another thing I really like about her character is that she's clearly a good person, at least in the sense that she has some sort of moral compass. She feels remorse for the bad things that she's done, and seems to be trying to sort of soften the way that the Ten Thunders behave. Obviously, there's still a crime syndicate, and she still kills people all the time and stuff, but that's just kind of par for the course in Malifaux. Everybody kills people to some extent. But I do find that kind of story very interesting, where she's put in this position where she has to run this organization, and it's a crime syndicate, and they're doing bad things, but she's trying to sort of do it in a way that is a little bit less harsh, and in a way where she can kind of earn the respect of the people that work for her, as opposed to just being brutal and ruthless. Trying to figure out how to like balance the fear and the respect is something that I find really interesting. And I think there's a lot of characters that kind of lean very hard into one or the other. But I like the fact that she sort of tries to make her own path again and figure out a way to balance both of those two things. The other really interesting thing about her is that she was influenced by the Burning Man. And she's not a character that I would have predicted to be somebody to come under the influence of the Burning Man. But I like this idea that her remorse for killing her father is actually what made her like mentally and emotionally vulnerable, and therefore came under its influence. And now she sort of sees him and talks to him and is constantly thinking about the decisions that she made and second-guessing herself. And that's really interesting, both because it shows that softer side of her personality, but it also shows the weakness in her character. I find that a lot of times characters like her are portrayed as being flawless, where they kind of just are super powerful and they can just do whatever they want, and they don't really have any more depth to their character. And I think that's a really interesting angle for Misaki's character, where she's often doubting herself and in some cases regretting the decisions that she's made in the past. And that point is really driven home in the fact that she is also always seeking out advice and taking counsel from other people who she respects, like Minako Rei and Yuko as well. The story between Misaki and Yuko, I think, is one of the most interesting in all of Malifaux. And I really like the relationship between the two of them, because Yuko sort of plays the role of the wise old mentor that you would normally see in a lot of other fiction. She's kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi to Misaki's Luke. And I really like the way the two play off each other. And I also think it's kind of cool that we get a little bit of a subversion of that trope, because Yuko is obviously this like very attractive young Asian woman, and that's not somebody that you typically see playing the role of the wise mentor. So I think it adds a lot of interest to her character, but it also sort of develops out that side of Misaki's personality, and the fact that she is open to getting input from other people and taking advice. And she obviously follows that advice, and hopefully that will work out for the best for her. I'll be really curious to see where they go with Misaki's character. Obviously, the Ten Thunders are a major player in the world of Malifaux. They have a lot of intel on the tyrants. They obviously stopped the Governor General from becoming a tyrant himself, and they have this relationship with the Hungering Darkness as well as Shenlong. So there's a lot of interesting things that sort of tie them into the larger lore. And up until now, they've always kind of been background players, but Misaki's got her fingers in a lot of different things that are going on. So I'm really curious to see if they're going to continue to participate in a lot of the really major story events, or if they're going to kind of stay in the shadows the way that they like to for a whole lot longer. Obviously, their whole story up until this point has been them planning and plotting and setting things in motion to try to take over Malifaux City, and I'll be kind of surprised if that ever actually happens, but I will be really curious to see what they end up trying to do, because at some point here, they're going to have to make a move and try to gain some more power or something. They can't just stay in the background forever. I do think it's really funny that they have saved the world like 3 times by my count. They stopped the Governor General from ascending. They stopped Plague from rebuilding his box the 2nd time. And they also stopped Nicodem from taking over the city from the Guild during his march on the Guild Enclave. So it's funny to me that the sort of gangsters and crime syndicate people are also sort of the heroes in some sense. I'm sure it may not feel that way if you live under their thumb and you are oppressed by them, but I think that plays into the whole sort of gray morality that we get a lot of in Malifaux, which is something that I really like. Misaki was my first master. She definitely appealed to me, at least aesthetically, as the sort of gangster ninja princess, and she will always have a place in my heart. So I hope we get a lot more lore with her in the near future, and we see a little bit more about where her character is going to go. But get down in the comments below and let me know what you think of Misaki and her whole backstory. Is she an interesting character to you? Or if you didn't think she was that interesting, have I been able to change your opinion at all? I want to send a huge thank you to the extremely cool kids here on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatized, Devin, and the Spilled Paint Pot. And thanks for watching.